in the last episode, I talked about what it's like to dream in uncertain circumstances. So for this episode, I would love to talk about a moment in my life in which I was forced to do this. Because you know what? I've had a lot of moments in my life where I really had to face my fear of the unknown. And that related a lot with me being able to find some type of level of certainty in a place in my life that seemed so uncertain at the time. My journey of being able to really commit myself to working through this started when I went to college. So I started out as an undecided major, and I came from, a kind of strict, it was very Catholic, private, all girls high school. And that was like a huge difference to college. Like I went to Penn State, and that it was like a whole new world for me. And also my high school too was a blue ribbon school. So you were basically taught to be the best at everything that you were doing. You had to excel in academics. You couldn't get anything less than like a B, because if you did, then you were kind of like looked at as dumber than like the other students in school. I was always a scholarship kid. Like I was a scholarship student when I was at that high school, and then also when I came into college as well. So I had a lot of that perfectionist mindset ingrained in my mind. Like that was my way of being. That was how I showed up in the world. I was a very anxious perfectionist, a super overachiever. I always wanted to have good grades. And as I started to progress in high school, I realized that I didn't even really care so much for the learning aspect anymore. Like I consider myself to be someone who loves learning. I love trying to ask questions and figure out new things. But a lot of that competitive nature of the school and that energy that I had to show up in order to like fit in at the school took a lot of my passion of learning away from me. And I realized like getting good grades became something that I just wanted to show for. Like I spent so much of my life trying to get all of these achievements just so that I can show other people how amazing I am. It was like I had to be in a space where I felt like I had to prove my worth to other people and also prove it to myself. And so when I got to college, it's like you really have to prioritize your passions and what you're good at and your academics, but in a way that was different from how I was in high school. And that made me realize that I was doing things that were so misaligned with me. And the few times where I did do things that were aligned with me, they were always the things that were super creative. Like I'm a really creatively minded person. I take a lot of pride in that. I was heavily involved in art, in music, and writing, and singing, like speech. Those were the things that made me feel so alive. Those were the things that made me excited to be at school. And so when I finally got to college, I felt like I started to go into this crisis mode because I'm like, I don't even know who I am anymore. What do I actually even want to do here? Like I remember spending so much time in the counselor's office in high school because I swear to you, every single week I would go in there and I'd be like, okay, this is a new thing that I want to try out. This is a new thing that I want to do because I'm a really energetic kind of person. And like I said before, I love learning. So I always want to try new stuff out. Like maybe that's part of my like Sagittarius energy. But that's always something that I've done. I've always been the kind of person who comes up with like a new thing that I want to dedicate myself to. So really, I was like all over the place. And that made me become really hard on myself when I finally got to college as an undecided major, because it was like, holy crap, like whatever major I pick, I feel like my life is going to depend on this. Like my entire way of being, living, my ability to make money and reach my goals is all going to depend on what major I choose. So I felt so pressured. And I also felt so much other pressure too of, feeling like I had to be doing the same thing that everyone else was doing, feeling like if I didn't do those things, then that must mean that I'm off track. And I really wanted people to be proud of me, and I still wanted things to show for how passionate I was. But I actually didn't know what the crap I wanted to do. Like, I had no idea. So I was just really unhappy my first year of college because of all of that. Quite honestly, I was constricting myself so much that I started to develop severe anxiety. Like, I had panic attacks all the time. And when I say all the time, like, I don't mean that lightly. I swear to you, like, I had multiple panic attacks when I was going throughout my classes my freshman year. I mean, it was so bad. I used to dread going to my classes, especially the ones in like the lecture halls with hundreds of students in them, because I swear, like, whenever I start to feel a panic attack, I get really nauseous, and my biggest fear was that I was going to like throw up in front of everyone, and I was never going to be able to live that down because everyone's going to like laugh, make fun of me, and be like, ew, who's that girl? So I dreaded being able to go to class. And so with all of that, I finally got to a space where I spent a lot of time trying to avoid and find excuses for why I couldn't go to class. I mean, I was so depressed. I went to counseling, and it was the worst experience ever because I really wasn't getting the help that I needed, and I was just pushed to have to be on like these anxiety meds, and it was really a heartbreaking time for me in my life because I felt like such a failure. You know, I thought that there was something wrong with me because I couldn't figure out what it was that I was supposed to be doing, and I had all of these personal challenges that I didn't know how to work through in the right way. At that time as well, I really started to struggle with my health. Like, whenever I would get really stressed out, I would turn to like binge eating, which was terrible. And also at that time as well, I didn't really know it yet, but I was starting to struggle with my autoimmune disease, which is called lupus. Like, if you don't know what that is, it's, like I said, it's an autoimmune disease, and it can cause some serious problems. Like, if you don't get that under control, like, for example, the ways that it was showing up for me at that time was I was having brain fogs where I would go into periods where, like, I couldn't remember where I was. Like, I couldn't remember things that were like going on in my classes, and it started out with little stuff at first, but it like progressively started to get worse. It makes you feel intense anxiety, which made everything harder. And then also too, you know, it can cause other things like you having seizures and things like that. I always had to find moments and time to go to the hospital, and so that was a tough period, and I didn't know how to navigate it, and it was so hard for me because here I am being a huge overachiever and feeling like I don't even know what I wanted to work towards. So from there, I ended up in like this huge mode of self-discovery where I started to try different classes out when I was in school, right? Like, that's what you would expect a student who's confused to do. And I ended up feeling even more incredibly lost once I started doing that, because I realized that the things that I thought I would be good at, I actually sucked at. You know, I tried out so many things, and by the end of it, I ended up switching my major 4 times when I was in college before I could really like commit to doing one thing. For example, like, I tried out education because I love teaching people things. I tried out business, and I hated it so much. I hated it so much. I was a broadcast journalism major at one point too, and that was interesting for me. So honestly, it was like all of those majors, with the exception of some of the business classes, like, they were all things that I was interested in, but none of them felt like they were giving me the freedom that I wanted. And I was drawn to psychology and communications and public speaking and all that stuff too. So it was hard to kind of maintain all of those things because you have to take your gen ed classes, but you also are supposed to have a major where that's like your main area of focus. But it's like I was all over the place because I had so many skills in all of those things, and I wanted something that was going to allow me to put most of those things together so that I would be in my mode of genius, because I felt like that was the way that I was going to impact the most people. Because with all of this confusion that I was dealing with at that time, one thing that was clear to me was that I wanted to do something special in the world that was going to allow me to help a lot of people. So in the midst of trying out all of these new things, I ended up in this class, which was called Bi-Sci 3, which is supposed to be an environmental science class. But the class really is just about self-discovery, which was perfect for me at that time. And it was about figuring out your place in the world and how you personally relate to the environment. That class really sent me into this awakened period in my life. It truly changed my life in the state that I was in. That class led to so much personal transformation in my life. I am so incredibly grateful that I had that experience. One thing that truly changed for me was like, I really started to question everything. Like, I've always questioned a lot of stuff, but like this time it was like extreme. It was almost like I was a little kid again, where kids are always asking you a million different things, and so you start to get frustrated because you're like, stop asking all these questions. But some things that I started to ask myself was like, okay, what is my purpose? Who am I? What am I supposed to be doing with my life? Why am I in college right now? Like, what is all of this for? And I felt so terrible when I didn't have the answers for all of those things. And me even getting to that point where I put energy into questioning things was when I started to notice that like some growth was actually happening. Because I felt so stuck for so long. It's like it's hard to notice when you're growing, when your mind is so focused on everything that you think that you're doing wrong. So that first kind of point was when I could actually sit there and say to myself, okay, I'm in a space where I can question that what is my purpose? In a way that's me acknowledging that I actually have a purpose here, which was so different from how I was in high school, because in high school I felt like, I was so down. I started to think maybe I didn't even have a purpose. Like I wanted to work towards that, but I wasn't sure what that thing could be because I was shifting from so many different things at one time. And I just couldn't figure out what it was. So I just thought to myself, maybe I don't have one. Maybe I'm just different from everyone else. So me just being in that deep breakdown kind of stage is where I started to come to the conclusion that like everything in my life is a lie. I felt that way because I had spent so many years not doing the things that made me happy. I spent so much time trying to fit myself into this box of perfection and fit myself into a box of that kind of like traditional idea of what it means to be successful. And, it means like you have to have a lot of money, a lot of friends, high status. And I really started to reflect on that. I started to journal, and I used to read my writings back to myself because I started to recognize too that I learn really well when I'm able to write things down and then say them out loud. I really am a deep auditory learner. Just by doing that process, I started to learn who I was as a person. That class, like there were no exams. You really just had to show up for lectures twice a week, and then you had to show up to a lab. Your lab was run by your TA at that time, and your lab was where you could discuss what happened during lectures with a specific group of like 12 or 13 students. Everything was just picked by random, and you had to do activities with them, and you never knew what you were going to do when you showed up to those labs. And the plans used to change all the time, but I was so excited just to show up to class again. And I loved that I didn't have to worry about exams, not because it was kind of like an easy way out, but it was more about the fact that I could look forward to sitting in a class where I could question things, where I was graded based on my ability to question and reflect on myself. And it wasn't about having the answers, it was about the process of trying to find out the answers. It was about opening myself up to the world. At that time in my life too, I really started to commit myself to doing things that felt like they brought me more purpose and happiness. During that time, a really big win for me too was the fact that I focused more on veganism. So I tried out veganism in high school and I failed a lot of times. Like, I failed for like a good 4 years of my life doing that on and off because I couldn't stick with it. And, I realized later on that it wasn't so much about like giving up the food. It was more about the deeper level of what was going on and like why I was using the food in a certain way. Because like I said, like I was binge eating, but like at the time I didn't recognize that was what it was. It was just more of like a very poor coping mechanism that I used at that time to deal with my stress. So when I could finally stick to being vegan just through going throughout this process, and even if I screwed up, because I still screwed up some of those times where like I'd be like, you know what, it's a Friday, I want to go out and I want to eat like a slice of pizza because I paid all this money for my meal plan, like I'm gonna eat this pizza. So even though I had moments like that, for the most part at that point I was vegan, but I didn't really end up fully doing it till sophomore year. But the big thing was I made the commitment, because that's where all the action starts, is when you're able to sit and commit yourself to something and you start to come up with actions that are going to be in alignment with that commitment that you've made. When I was journaling, I realized that the time where I was most vulnerable with myself was when I was able to write things down. It was a time where I could be honest. And that was like major for me because, I am a pretty honest person, and it's just like at that space in my life, I felt like I didn't even want to be honest with myself about what was going on because things were so painful and so challenging. It was easier to just kind of bury my problems and not have to look at what was going on. Over the course of that year and being in that class, I started to realize that I truly was a person who is deserving of love, someone who is deserving of feeling confident and just feeling good about myself. And I learned that it's really up to me to create the life that I want for myself. I realized that, it's like I don't have to keep making choices that are not in alignment with myself. I don't have to keep trying to fit myself into boxes that don't feel like I'm supposed to be in. During this time too, so many things started happening to me in terms of like spiritual experiences. So like quick background here for you a little bit. I've always been really spiritual. I've always kind of had things happen to me that were so different than things that other people were experiencing, like kind of the unexplainable things that you don't really have the answers for, where it's like I always knew things about people without actually having to know them, or I would know certain things before interacting with people. That's on like the most basic low level of what was going on. But I mean, things got crazy. Like my spiritual gifts really started to make themselves known at that time. And so I focused a lot of some of my attention on that. I shouldn't say all of it, but I did start focusing a lot of my attention on that. And my level of empathy for people significantly increased. And I knew that whatever was going on with me and in my spiritual gifts, that was something that I needed to use to give back to people, because I knew that they were there for a reason. I knew God was placing that within me for a reason. And so it was my responsibility to show up in that energy and use it in ways that are going to benefit other people as well as myself and my own growth. I started trying out even more classes. I started taking classes in human development and family studies. I was taking a lot of psychology courses, and I loved all of those things. I was in a couple of rehabilitation and human services courses as well, and those were all things that I found to be helpful, and they all focused on how to help other people, but I didn't feel like those things offered me the freedom that I was looking for. And specifically too with psychology as well, like I didn't want to be in a profession where I felt like I had to diagnose people. And by the way, this isn't me like looking down on psychology or like psychologists or anything like that, because psychology, that is a way of being. I mean, we're always using psychology. We're always doing that because that's just what it is. And we're always noticing people's behavior. We're always going to have motives for why we're doing things. There's always things going on in your subconscious that are guiding your decisions and your choices and your feelings. And I love learning all those things. It's just, I couldn't see myself having to, almost tell people what they have to do or what I think that they should do. And I didn't want to have to focus on, trying to diagnose them. I don't know, it just didn't feel right for me, but it was something that I was happy seeing that it was right for other people. And so I really had a passion there. I loved being in those classes because of all of the beautiful moments that I experienced my freshman year, even though it was challenging, even though that was a challenging time in my life. I was so happy about the experience that I became a TA for that class my sophomore year, which also was a big deal because you had a lot of responsibilities as a TA for that class. Like, it wasn't like being a TA for all of the other lecture hall classes. So, like I said before, the way that the class worked, you had to show up for two lectures like during the week, and then you had your lab. So I was responsible for running the labs. I was responsible for all of the grading, which was crazy. I mean, that took me a good, I don't even know how many hours. I mean, I had 25 different students. And like I said, it was based on journaling and how they answered the question. So, I mean, I really had to look for areas of growth in what was going on. So a lot of that time, I also had to spend reflecting on what they wrote in their own reflections. I mean, that was literally like having an entire job. And that's why a lot of people don't choose to be buy-side TAs, because it's a job and you're not getting paid for it. But I wanted to do it anyway because I felt so good about the experience, and I just wanted to facilitate the growth of other people. Yeah, so that's what I chose to do. So when I showed up to labs, I actually started coaching the students in my labs. I had to come up with all of the activities that we were doing. I had to go through a whole, basically like a full year of training just for this job. I had such a wonderful time just being able to see how much my students were growing. It was so rewarding for me. I loved hearing all of their stories, and I got to know all of them on such a deep level too. And they got to know each other on a deep level as well, and that made me question things even more. That's when I really started to focus even more on my talents and my skills, and continuing to work on being the creator of my own life and not just going with what other people were doing or what seemed right for other people to do, but that didn't resonate with me. I also really loved teaching things to people. I loved being able to sit there and have to just be in my zone of genius and my zone of creativity, because I had to be creative to come up with all of the exercises and activities and pull everything together. And from then on, I just knew that was the thing that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I always wanted to be the person who was going to help people transform, the person who can facilitate growth for other people. And I was going to make sure that I was going to do that. So another big question that I had at that point was, well, all right, cool. Now I know what I want to do, but like, what career is that though? Like, I can't just sit around facilitating groups at this college for the rest of my life. Like, there has to be something else that I can do. I started to realize, all right, there is no major at Penn State that's going to cater to me. So my choices were, hey, become like a freaking like a quadruple major, if that's even a possibility, or have like be a double major and have like a ton of minors, which didn't feel right for me. I just didn't want to have to do that, and I still felt like that wasn't going to give me the freedom that I wanted either. Yeah, so I realized there is no major for me here, and now I've at least got some direction on what I wanted to do. And like I said, I started coaching students in my labs, like as groups. Like, I had so much fun doing that. Everything just started to connect for me. During that time, I started watching videos of people who were motivational speakers and people who were working as life coaches. And so I really started to research a lot about coaching and how people become equipped for that, and what exactly is life coaching. Like, that was another big question, because a lot of people think of coaching as something that is like not necessarily what it is. You hear like life coach, a lot of people think, okay, you have to have your entire life figured out, and like you have to be able to tell people what they need to do. And that wasn't me. Like, I didn't want to have to do that all the time. I wanted to teach people things, and I wanted to be able to be in that position if I had to. But my big thing was, I wanted to help them be empowered and be in a place of power where they could figure out what the best would be for them. And I could be the guide to help them along the way. I could be the person to enter into a partnership with them that's going to be creative and that's going to help them reach their fullest potential. I remember watching this one video of this girl, and she was a really young life coach. Like, she was in her 30s, which is still pretty young for like the coaching world. For people who have credentials in the coaching world is what I should say, because there are younger life coaches, but a lot of them don't really have a lot of experience like coaching in a professional sense, and they haven't gone through any training or anything. And that was important for me. Like, I wanted to take my time in college learning the things that I could directly use in my coaching business when I created that. And I also wanted to be able to get a bunch of coaching credentials, not so much now because I wanted things to show for, but because I wanted to have something that was going to help me be the best coach that I could possibly be. Like, I'm a lifelong learner, and I was so open to learning everything about that profession that I possibly could, so I can show up in the best ways that I could with the people who are going to be coming towards me for help and guidance. But as I watched that YouTube video and I heard that woman talking about her experiences, it's like something really clicked. Like, I knew that was the thing I was supposed to be doing. And I remember praying while watching her video. And I asked God, I said, God, like, is this the thing that you want me to be doing? Is this it? And I swear to you, when I did that, I heard a voice in my head very, very, very clearly say to me, yes. And then I looked up, and there was a repeating number synchronicity, which, at that time, repeating number synchronicities had like a huge importance in my life, and it represented a lot of things. And at that point, I associated seeing repeating number synchronicities in certain numbers as a yes. So I knew that was my sign immediately, and I went with it, and everything felt aligned. So that's what I ended up just doing and dedicating myself to. So now it was like, okay, cool. I finally have the clarity that I'm looking for, but holy crap, what am I supposed to do now? Because I'm entering another breakdown phase where I'm like, there's no major here for this. What am I supposed to choose as a major if I know that there's nothing I can have here? So I started looking into how I could transfer to other schools, and I realized there really aren't many schools at all in this country that in the US that offers coaching as a major. If you want to do that, you have to start out like as a psychologist or a counselor or something else in like those related fields. But again, like I said, that's just not where I was. But I still wanted to take all of those classes. I just didn't want to have like 4 separate majors and end up in college for like 12 years doing a bunch of different things and feeling like I was lost all over again. And so I started to develop a plan. My plan was to start coach training, and originally I wasn't going to start coach training until after graduation, if I could figure out what I wanted to do at the school. But then I realized, like, okay, if there's nothing that I can do here, like, why am I here at school? Because I don't want to waste my time. I mean, I was so dedicated to helping people and focusing on that I was not willing to sacrifice that goal for anyone or for anything. And at the same time, I was faced with a lot of fear. You know, it was like, okay, so how am I supposed to be my own boss? How am I going to make money doing this stuff? Like, how am I going to learn all the things about business that I need? How am I going to get all of these skills and learn all the things to put into my coaching business? How can I incorporate, you know, spirituality and my own spiritual gifts as well as my own other gifts for helping people as well into one thing? And also too, I had fear because of my age, and I recognize that a lot of people who don't look into coaching, who don't recognize what that can mean because they only have one specific idea of coaching, how they were going to like perceive me because of my age. Because there weren't a lot of life coaches who were like 20 years old. Like, people think of that as, okay, you're 20, how are you going to do this? You have to have all the answers. But it's like, no, that's not what it's about. That's not the core of what coaching is. And I was so intimidated by having to explain that to people. It just left me with a ton of fear in my life. So eventually, I just got to a point where I was like, listen, B, girl, you have to make a choice. Are you going to live the rest of your life knowing that you don't even know how much time you have left? Are you really going to spend that time in a place of doubt and fear and not knowing what you want to do and ending up miserable again? Or are you going to make the choice to literally design the life that you want and do the thing that's telling you, hey, B, come towards me. This is what you want. This is what you can do to help people. Like, this is your thing. And it was like, why do I have all this fear when I know that this is something I'm good at? Like, I was spending so much time in labs doing this with 2 different groups twice a week. And I was doing it outside of my coaching groups as well. Like, that's how I spent a lot of my time that sophomore year. It was just about coaching people. Because the plan at this point was, okay, drop out and then invest in as many coach training schools that I possibly can, learn everything that I can about business, network with all these people. I mean, I was like ready to go all in, and I was going to use as many resources as I could, and I was going to take the rest of that time while I was at school connecting with as many mentors and professors and people that I could, so that I could learn the things that I needed to learn in a way that felt like it was appropriate for me and that was going to allow me to reach my goals. And then one day in that lecture hall, and I remember, it was like maybe not even a month before leaving for like until like the second semester was ending. It was like a month before. And this woman came into the BISAC class, and she talked about her experience of taking authority over her life. I mean, she really was in such a similar place that I was, except she was there years before me. And she talked about how when she was at Penn State, she was able to create her major. And I was like, as soon as I heard that, I was like, okay, let me hop on that. Because that is such a great idea. Like, if I don't have to drop out here, why am I doing that? And so that's what I ended up doing. I connected with the BPhil department, which is the BPhil. It's a special program within the Bachelor of Philosophy major. So yeah, it's a specific path that you can take where you can create your major. You're an inter-college student, so you can take whatever classes you want and combine them into one thing that's going to help support you in what you choose to do in your life and your career path. But there's a lot of planning that has to go into it. There's a lot of self-advocacy that goes into it. I mean, you have to do a capstone presentation, a project. It takes a lot of effort to create your classes. It was required for you to have a mentor, because you can't do everything on your own, and it's good to always have that guidance. But it also meant that I had to go out and find my mentor, someone who I truly felt like I had a connection with, who could help me, because I wasn't going to have an academic advisor like all of the other students at Penn State would have, because it was a special path that I was taking. So I spent literally that entire summer just working on my own personal growth. I worked on building my business, finding people to connecting with mentors, other life coaches. I was being coached by life coaches. I enrolled in a coach training program while I was still at the school, and I continued that program. I ended up getting my life coaching certification while I was still in college, and I started coaching people those remaining years. I started to focus more on the spiritual aspects as well of life, and navigating through challenges and learning as much as I can and giving that knowledge back, while also helping people transform themselves in their own lives. When I wasn't in class learning, I was out building the business. I was out literally getting clients and just coaching them. I was able to meet so many different people during that time in my life. I mean, college is such a great opportunity just for you to meet so many different people. But also too, it was like, because I had all of these experiences and because I felt so confident in myself, and I was being coached as well, I had all of these opportunities to connect with people and to end up hosting my own workshop. I started to do that as well. I hosted a workshop, and it was so amazing for me to just continue that process of awakening and helping others do that. During this time as well, I started to extend the type of clients that I wanted to work with. I wasn't just working with college students anymore. I started to work with older women and women who were in their 30s and their 40s and almost their 50s, really. And I realized so many of the same problems that the college students were having were the same ones that other people were coming to me with, who are already established in their careers and who are way older than me. That's when I really started to see how connected we all are, how all of us struggle with these things where we feel like we want to come into alignment with who we are and what we feel like we're called to do, and just being able to dream. That was my big thing. I was so focused on helping people become more resilient and follow their dreams, become more courageous, and become more bold. Step outside of their box to do the things that they feel are going to be aligned with them, that are going to help them evolve as a person and help evolve their souls as well. I'm not sharing this to say that the journey was easy, because it really wasn't. There were so many things that I had to experience, so many things that I had to go through, so many aha moments that I had to have myself in order to help other people have those aha moments of learning. But it was worth it. I'm glad that I started out on the path that I was. My challenges were really what brought me to those moments where I figured it out, what it was that I wanted to do. I don't just do coaching now. I also do a lot of public speaking and a lot of teaching as well. I do a lot of things, honestly. And I've realized, even though coaching is something that I'm focusing on now at this point in my life. And it's always going to be something that I'm doing in some capacity in my life, because it's honestly is so ingrained in me at this point. It's just natural for me to do that and show up as a coach, even when I don't consciously mean to. I am just going to continue to dedicate myself to doing all of the things that I know that I'm meant to do while I'm here, and trusting my intuition to guide me on my journey, as well as my angels and God and all of the beings that I know are always with all of us, who are giving us the guidance that we need and are giving us the clarity and direction to truly change our own lives. If you're ready to fully dive into doing the work that can help you further develop your spiritual gifts and access your personal power to transform your hard experiences to fulfilling experiences, reach out to me through my website, beaoncaward.com, and reach out to every person you know who would be ready to do the same.